Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the OC Forum. Today's special program, Fostering Civil Discourse, is brought to you by our sponsors, UC Irvine and UCI Health, as well as new sponsor, Polity, who you'll hear more about in a moment. I'm Ariana Barrios, Executive Director of the OC Forum, and also a council member in the City of Orange. So today's program is something I'm very interested in, and I hope you will be too. And I have the pleasure of being your host for today. All around the nation, we've been seeing the deterioration of civil discussions and basic respect for individuals falling on opposite sides of the political spectrum. Peaceful protests have devolved into anything but that, as we saw during the demonstrations of 2020 escalate from simply walking down the street with signs to burning and destroying cities, and finally culminating in the storming of our nation's capital on January 6th. So it's probably way past time for us to find better ways to come together. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, and actually show you a really fun experiment or game. So, how do we even begin to bridge the gap between political ideologies? So, today it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Ben Judge, and his credentials are quite something. Ben, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for all the work you do and for what the OC Forum's, always putting on.
Well, I am super impressed by your credentials, and I just want to share that with our audience a little bit because it is really something what you have done and what you're doing now, what you're bringing to our program today. So Ben is the founder of Polity. He's also the creator and executive producer of a documentary, Right Makes Might, the Lincoln Douglas debates, which I'm a huge wonk about Lincoln, so I can't wait to dig into that a little bit more. You are also the co-editor of United and Independent, the John Quincy Adams on American Foreign Policy, and you hold a PhD in political science from the Claremont Graduate University. But that's not all, because you are also a reservist with the United States Navy. So I don't even know where you get the time, but a very impressive resume. So while I will thank you for your service, I really want to dig into polity and ask you a few
Yeah,
questions because
absolutely.
obviously this is something that's a passion project for you, but tell me a little bit more about it.
No, so really, when we started Polity, we really started with, and I know we'll get into it, with the decision point method, really asking the question, how can we get uh, fellow citizens, Americans, to think about politics from the standpoint of a decision maker? Um, I don't need to tell you this as a member of a city council that it's a very different look when you are commenting on matters going on in a city as opposed to having to actually make decisions. And the thesis really was that if you could craft something that would allow people to have those conversations, the conversation may still be charged, people may not agree, but it will immediately become measured, and that there is a level of seriousness that comes from thinking as a decision maker. And that's really in any walk of life, right? That's whether it's running an organization, a business, and certainly true in politics. So that's really what we started with and said, how can we bring that about? And that's how Polity started.
And you know what, I always, listening to you, it always comes to mind about the famous relationship between Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, that they could be adversaries, on the floor, and yet um, absolutely always be civil, always be respectful to each other. Is that part of what we're trying to teach here, and to learn how to get back to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about President Reagan and Speaker O'Neill. I'll do another example. And this is a different time in California, right? But Pete Wilson and Willie Brown, um, you know, two people who had diametrically different views on things, but who had a certain amount of respect for each other as politicians, and could actually negotiate with a level of seriousness because they knew they were across the aisle from someone serious. That's really what we're trying to show is, you're not always going to agree. And some things are going to be just knockdown, drag out fights, but there's a certain way of making political decisions and thinking about political decisions in a free society where you are accountable to people that doesn't allow you to think about political decisions without consequences. And so if you are going to make a decision, what are the consequences of that? Are you willing to live with those consequences? And when you start to have that discussion, then all of a sudden, you're not just, you realize that, oh, I got to make these by myself. And now that person I'm talking to, I realize they have to make decisions too. And so maybe we're trying to both figure out, how much we can actually accomplish and still justify our decisions to the people who put us in a particular position.
Well, and I love that you bring up consequences. I think that that's really easy to forget sometimes. It's easy sometimes to be so passionate and be like, well, I'm, ride or die. This is my decision. And then all of a sudden, when the tables are flipped, you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now I want it to go the other way because it suits me, and it doesn't work that way in real life. So I love this, and you mentioned it just a minute ago, and I want to dig a little deeper. Decision point, the decision point method. So this is something you've come up with, and is part of what Polity teaches and shares and trains on. Can you talk about that? Because I think that's what we're going to see today, right?
Absolutely. And it is meant to be the framework for just what we talked about. We say, all right, we want to have a conversation and to think about political decisions from the standpoint of a decision maker. So what is the framework for doing that? And what I would say is this framework can be applied to really anything. I mean, we've applied it to politics, but we came up with it to how to make it simple, repeatable, something that anyone could apply to anything. And it really is a 4-step process. Step 1, you pick a topic. Step 2, you pick an office, a decision-making office. So, and by the way, I should say, that could be as a voter. I think that's something we overlook a lot of times, that a voter is a decision maker. Mm-hmm. But you pick a topic, you pick an office, and then you pick a situation in which that decision maker has to interact with that topic. And that's really the key thing. It immediately places an issue that could be very charged or a particular policy issue that when you discuss in the abstract, immediately the conversation goes off the rails between people who disagree with each other. But now all of a sudden, you are a congressman dealing with a budget matter that happens to deal with that issue. You have a national security crisis. It could be anything. You see, and we're going to go through later in the program some of the scenarios that we've come up with. So that's step 3. You pick a scenario. And then step 4 is you explain what you would do. Mm-hmm. And that one's also, there's 2 layers to that, right? One is you're explaining the decision, but the fact that you have to explain it out loud.
Right. You can't hide. You have to be right out there.
Also, there's some things that really don't sound that smart when you say them out loud.
What? That never happens.
That. Yeah, we've all done that, where you say something and you think, wow, I need to.
It sounded so much better in my head.
Yeah, it sounded so much better. And even people who agree with you will say, I don't know about that, Ben.
Right.
So that's the method. And that's what we've tried to bring here with the decision point method and what Polity is promoting.
So that's the basis for the actual exercise that we're going to see, the game, Bad News Boss. Am I correct on that? Okay, so we're going to get to, I want to talk about that right before we jump into that exercise and see it happen. But, according to my research on your company, that Polity actually partnered with the University of North Carolina to test this methodology. And you did it with, I'm checking my notes, 400 Republicans and Democrats. Tell me about that because that had to be one, a huge undertaking, but really fascinating in terms of what happened.
Yes, I'll tell you, we were, skipping ahead to the end. We were pretty pleased with how it turned out. And we weren't sure ahead of time how it was going to going in. But one of the big things that we made a priority of really coming into Polity is that um, we wanted a research basis for what we were doing. It was something that we intuitively thought would be pretty good, but we did want to test it. We did want to go through that level of rigor to say, look, this isn't just something that we threw darts at a board and came up with, and it sounds good and it tests well, but that actually there is real research behind it. It can be measured by an independent party. So we brought a start. There was in-person conversations. There was virtual. A lot happened virtually, and what we found was that number one, when someone of the opposing political party saw videos of politicians using the decision point method, we got a handful to do so. The level of perceived rationality and respect went up. It went up, one, when they saw the videos, and then it went up again when the survey participant actually took the scenario first and then watched the video.
Okay.
And that was good. Then the big research came. Then the big win came when we actually saw that people of opposing political views were more interested in having conversations with people who had different views than they were with people who agreed with them, so long as they used the decision point method.
Now that's just fascinating because that suggests that what we want is to be respectful. We want to have deep dialogue with each other.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something, the scenario that was used to determine that, we didn't choose some, you know, lowest common denominator. That was on gun control.
Wow, in North Carolina.
So it was not, that was a big moment. That was a big moment for the organization. That was a big moment for the method, and gave us a lot of excitement about what comes next.
So let me ask you, what is your vision for polity? Obviously you're working on it with students. There's a component. What is that vision? Is it to get everybody trained or retrained, maybe the better word? But what is that vision for polity?
It's to reset the terms of political debate. I think I go back to something I said before about the about voters being decision makers. I think that gets lost sometimes. It's very easy to think of yourself engaging in politics kind of from the outside in the abstract. All these questions are in abstract. Well, I will say one, set of circumstances that really annihilated that, way of thinking about things was COVID. All of a sudden, political decisions became very important, and you could see the effect almost immediately. But you have to think about, if you're going to engage as a citizen, you have to think about yourself as a decision maker. Maybe one day you will be a member of the city council. Maybe one day you'll run for a state legislative position, maybe something more. But if nothing else, an active participant gets to vote every so often about political decisions. And so immediately framing things that way, it makes reorienting the terms of political debate also means re-energizing a citizenry and doing it in a way that can grow on its own. And that was really my thing with polity, is to create a framework that can grow. It doesn't require us to be everywhere at once. It requires a handful of things that we can do to spread well beyond students. That was a place to start, because having debates on campuses isn't really that much fun right now, so I'm told. Um, but it's much more than that, right? Everyone has a story about a family member that there's a long pause in a phone call, and what should be filling that space, which is what's
Right.
going on in the world. You can't talk about it because you want the phone call to continue, and you don't want to, have to pick up the pieces of a relationship afterwards.
Yeah,
So
in my
that's
family, that's called Thanksgiving dinner. So,
right.
well, and I find it so fascinating because I had to do some research for another topic, and Chapman University, right here where we're based in Orange, does an annual survey of fears, of American fears. And for the past, I want to say 2 or 3 years, the number one fear of Americans has been, and I was just blown away when I heard this. The number one fear is corrupt politicians. Number one fear, above and beyond anything. I mean, it was off the charts beyond what the next thing was.
That's
So, the fact that this is something we fear so much, but we can't talk to each other in a way that breaks those fears down. Really, I mean, what you're doing really sets up a whole different reality in terms of how we talk to each other.
Well, I appreciate that. That's the hope. That's what we want to see, and what we'll be interested in promoting for
So
a long time.
I'm really excited to get to our next phase with our students, but I need you to set this up for us a little bit. So the polity game is Bad News Boss. So how did you integrate that? How did you create that or craft that from the decision point method? And talk a little bit about what we're going to see.
Absolutely. So our big thing with Bad News Boss, with the game was, could we create a product that, going back to what I said before, how do we make this method live on its own and not require, moderator, not require necessarily, specific events? Hey, how can you at Thanksgiving have a conversation with, family, with friends? And how can it be fun? And that's really what came out of Bad News Boss. And so, what the title comes from is, and it was a big thing in the scenarios that we put together ourselves, is there's the first decision you make. And then we talked about consequences. Then the consequences hit. And then another set of decisions come. So, you have to decide what you're going to do in a particular scenario, and then there's going to be, then you're going to get the bad news. And the bad news could be that a donor's unhappy, could be that you're, risking your reelection. It could be that you miscalculated the consequences of your first decision. Could be any number of things. But that there is now something that there's new information. You either have to decide, are you going to stick with what you did originally, or are you going to make a change?
So that's what we're going to
And
watch the kids go through
that's
right now.
That's right.
So you don't
That's
know
right.
any of that information up front. You make your decision, you feel like you made a great decision, and then you see how it might spiral out of control, or ding ding ding, you're a winner.
Yep. And if this is the hill you want to die on,
Great. That's a really good.
go for it. But you got to say it out loud.
Got to say it out loud. I love it. Well, Ben, thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I'm really excited for our audience to see how this goes. And we will be sharing the information about Polity and about the game and where people can find out more once they've watched it. I think they're really going to want to, check it out and use it in other places, which I think this should be mandatory training for anyone who becomes a new elected. That's for sure. But we're going to take a quick break and hear from a message from our sponsors, and then we're going to watch the students play the game. So, Ben, thank you so much, and stay with us.
At UCI, we believe in the infinitely curious. We believe in the courageous of thought, the ones willing to fail again and again until one day they don't. When you have the courage to see things differently, to see opportunity where others see impossibility, amazing things will happen. At UCI, we stop at nothing to change the world, to save lives, and deliver the extraordinary.
Welcome back to the OC Forum. My name is Amanda McGuire, and I will be your moderator for the remainder of our discussion. You just heard from Ariana Barrios and Dr. Ben Judge as they talked about polity and their use of the decision point method in helping us bridge the political divide. Today, you'll learn all about polity's new game, Bad News Boss, a game designed to navigate difficult policy topics across all political ideologies. To show you how it's done, we have invited a panel of 8 student leaders representing 4 college campuses across Orange County. You may notice that our scenarios given here today are based on real-life situations that have been dealt with by our nation's leaders. This game requires each participant to conduct solution-oriented conversations in order to come together. Let's get into the rules for the game, shall we? First, we begin by choosing 2 decision makers who will be assigned a leadership role: president, governor, or member of Congress. Next, our leaders will be given a scenario in which they need to determine their course of action. Once a decision is made, bad news is given, which will cause leaders and panelists to consider factors they previously weren't advised on. Before our 2 leaders come to their last and final conclusion, we will invite fellow panelists to discuss what they think is best. Leaders, listen up. Your input may sway the decision. Once panelists give their input, it's time for our leaders to make their decisions. Lastly, after our 2 leaders make their final decision, we put it to a vote. Which leader's decision did you like best? From there, we will close the round. I will announce 2 new leaders, and we'll continue with our next scenario. Let's begin. To start, we're going to have our 2 representatives from UCI begin us on our first round. Anna, Sergey, you ready?
Yes.
Okay. You are a governor. Law enforcement throughout the state is rallying behind a new bill that would increase penalties for both possession and distribution of fentanyl due to rising crime rates and overdoses. However, a previous bill you supported encourages rehabilitation for drug users instead of incarceration. Do you support the bill? Anna, we'll start with you.
I would support the bill. I believe that increasing penalties would de-incentivize people to seek after drugs and acquiring them. I do believe that I would advocate for some type of rehab, but I wouldn't center the entire bill on just rehabilitation, but I would vote to criminalize it.
Sergey, your thoughts?
I would not support this bill. I think the United States has an incredibly horrible incarceration rate as it begins with already, particularly around drugs now. Rehabilitation that every other first world country has input, like Sweden, Denmark, Finland, etc., that don't allow this to continue to happen again and don't allow for these incredibly long prison sentences and incarcerations, would be something that's more impactful and able to really actually stop fentanyl overdosing and fentanyl crimes.
Very interesting and a lot to think about. So I'm going to give you some bad news. The news is in. And for Anna, since you said yes, with the harsher penalties, it is projected the jail and prison populations will increase by 20%, which could lead to overcrowding. Do you change your decision? Don't answer yet. I'm going to give bad news to Sergey. Since you said no, we also have another alternative. The largest percentage of fentanyl overdoses are between young people ages 16 to 25. Do you change your decision? Before you 2 answer, leaders, I'm going to put it to our other panelists and see what they think. Let's go with Ethan. What are your thoughts on this? Considering all the bad news, what would you do?
I think, given the bad news on both sides, I might strive for a compromise, and I would argue to send the bill back to the Assembly, and I would be willing to support harsher punishments for the distribution of fentanyl, but given that I'm a governor that supports a more rehabilitative attitude toward nonviolent drug offenses, I would support that toward simply possessing fentanyl.
Okay. Selena, what are your thoughts?
I would be against the bill because, the card says before I previously supported a bill that encourages rehabilitation. And I think that before we consider more drastic measures such as increasing jail penalties or something like that, we should do more targeting from the origin. So right now I know that there's something really popular like rainbow fentanyl or like colored pills that are primarily targeted towards the younger population. So I think we should start with preventing things like that from happening before we go into increasing penalties.
So we have a lot to consider now. Leaders, I hope your gears are turning. What would be your final decision in light of everything that has been mentioned? Let's go with Sergey first.
I would still stay with my decision to not support this bill. It's really unfortunate that individuals who are typically younger are being affected by this fentanyl bill, but throwing them in prison is not a solution to that. It's a matter of rehabilitation, getting them the right resources where they need to be. There's a lot of things that we can do for that, whether that be through classes or workshops or really anything that's going to be able to bring resources and community engagement to the younger individuals, but throwing them in prison for possession is not the solution.
Anna, how about you?
I am in agreement with, or kind of in agreement with Sergey and Ethan. I believe that a compromise would be ideal. I don't think that having higher incarceration rates is the best way to go. But for people who are incarcerated for fentanyl possession, I think it would be good to have workshops or programs that will help people out of their drug addiction while they're incarcerated, and also prevention efforts. So I would support a synthesis of both.
Okay. So what do you guys think? A show of hands, who agrees with this decision? Everyone in support. Benjamin? Can I hear from one person? Who opposes? Does anyone oppose what Anna and Sergey were saying?
I would just like to add something on. I would say I definitely agree with what you were saying, Sergey, because we have seen time and time again, and so many studies have shown that increasing prison sentences actually does not deter crime across the board. It does sometimes for murder, but especially for drug possession, it does not deter these crimes from happening. A lot of people who possess and distribute drugs, they don't even know what the consequences are. So, making the sentences more severe and making the punishments more severe is not going to stop them from committing these crimes. And at the same time, I really liked what you were saying as well with, rehabilitation being more of the solution and how we've seen it happen in these other countries. We're all part of the human race. Addiction works the same, whether it's in Denmark, the United States, Somalia, anywhere. We need to be listening to mental health experts and to sociologists and experts in the field and what they're saying about the fact that we need to have more rehabilitation, because that's the solution. Putting people in prison actually, it just makes the problem worse once they leave, because they don't have jobs. They're just going to go back to the streets to dealing. And so if we actually want to invest in our communities, then we should do just that and not be preventative, and be preventative, not be punitive.
That's great. And there's been a lot. This is a difficult situation, of course, and it's not meant to be easy. But you guys went through this, and we had a very good solution-oriented conversation here. So that concludes our first round. I'm going to go ahead and pick our next two, and we're going to go on with our second scenario. We're going on to the next round. And for this time, I'm going to ask our students from Chapman University to be our two leaders. Ethan and Paris, are you guys ready? Yes. Okay. You are a member of Congress. A new bill has been introduced to streamline the path to immigration. The bill has bipartisan support, but will require additional funding. While you support the bill, it is unclear whether the additional funding will come from a tax increase or budget cuts. Do you support the bill? Let's go with Paris.
I would say yes, I would support the bill, especially given that we have so many immigrants coming from different countries in Latin America. And even though America, we love to pride ourselves on how we're so pro-democracy, but in the past, especially in, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we went into a lot of countries in Latin America and staged military coups and overthrew their governments that they had democratically elected. And now, because of all of that upheaval, that's a big reason why a lot of them are now coming to the United States. And so for that reason, I would support the bill. And I also think that, the border crisis needs to be helped in, not whatever way possible. Obviously, there are some solutions that are too dire and just not going to work out for American citizens. But I think a pathway to citizenship and having, because there's a big fallacy that's prevalent specifically on the right, where these people don't pay taxes when actually most people who are illegal immigrants actually do pay tax dollars, and they help fund our government. And I think having more of them would be great, and that would just influence our culture and our communities in a wonderful way.
Absolutely. Ethan, what do you think?
So I would say I agree with the decision that Paris came to, maybe for slightly different reasons, but I definitely agree with the decision she came to. And I would say because assuming that the bill has bipartisan support and assuming that I personally support the bill, which in the card it says, then I would definitely see a reason to approve of it. And this is because that whether we raise taxes or approve budget cuts to finance the bill, that's an entirely separate issue that can be dealt with at a separate time. The budgetary process takes place later. We can deal with that during reconciliation. But if the bill has bipartisan support, I would definitely signal my approval for it.
Okay, pretty straightforward. Well, the bad news is in, and we figured out where that money's coming from. The budget to increase border security will be diverted to support the Path to Immigration bill. You campaigned heavily on increasing border security. Do you change your decision now? Wait, before we go though, let's have our panelists from the other end weigh in. Let's do Benjamin. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, as Paris and Ethan mentioned, there is a lot of harm going on in the communities of immigrants. So, for example, one of the things being that they can't call the police because they don't have their visa or anything of that sort, and consequently, there's a lot of crime committed against them, and they can't do anything about it. And there's also a lot of things like they can't get a proper job. I would support the bill because I think that by allowing these people to get their citizenship, it would enable us to fund potential projects that increase border security. Because when people have jobs, that they have their visa, it makes it much more viable for them to get a good career. And consequently, I feel as though we would be able to mitigate some of the effects of border security through that process.
Brody, do you want to weigh in?
What was the bad news again?
Bad news is the budget to increase border security will be diverted to support the Path to Immigration bill. And you campaigned heavily on increasing border security. Do you change your decision to support it?
I think Benny makes a really good point about the fact that a lot of crime against illegal immigrants or people that aren't here legally, they don't have an avenue to reach out for help because like police or anything like that. So I think diverting that budget in order to create more opportunity for these immigrants to be ingrained in our society properly is a really good thing. So I still support the bill 100%, and I think it's really important, something we've been lacking for a long time. It needs to happen.
Okay, well, leaders, you heard some input from panelists. Does this change your mind at all? Where do you go from here? We'll start with Ethan.
So the bad news is definitely troubling, to say the least. I think for me it would really depend on how much of the border security funding would be diverted. I think that's a big factor. But I think over here they make very good points that as of right now, the path to citizenship isn't the greatest, and there's a lot of problems. And if we streamline that process, make it easier, and they contribute to the overall economy, then eventually we will have that funding again to support our law enforcement at the border.
Paris, what about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that conclusion, and I would still stick strong to supporting the bill, despite the fact that apparently I campaigned to increase border security, which I realistically probably would not have done. But given the situation, and also going back, even looking before, what I was talking about in the mid-20th century, all of this land used to be indigenous land, and then it was Mexico. And so the fact that there are so many people here that, it's really their land, I think that's something that we need to, it's definitely not like a black and white issue, but I think it's something that we should be looking more into. And I love what these two gentlemen brought up about, not having places to report crime and not having safety, despite the fact that they are taxpayers. So, it obviously depends on the budget, but like you said, and how much is taken away from border security, but I would still support it.
Yeah, you bring up a very good point. It's not a black and white issue, but it sounds like we kind of came to a consensus decision there in generally supporting this. But I want to hear from anyone else. Is there anyone here on the panel who maybe had a different reasoning, might have agreed, maybe disagreed? Is there any other thoughts, maybe opposition views? Sergey?
It's not an opposition. I just want to compliment both of you, especially considering the fact this is bipartisan support. As Alexander Hamilton said, I mean, if you're able to have two parties so drastically different come to support a bill, it's bound to happen, right? We only approve 30 bills per year. If it's one of these, I'm glad for it to be that one.
For this next round, we're going to have our students from Concordia University be our two decision makers. Brody, Benjamin, are you guys ready?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, you are a member of Congress. The draft federal budget has increased national security spending by $50 billion in light of an allied country being invaded. To fund the increase, you will need to raise taxes. However, inflation and gas prices are at a record high. Do you approve the federal budget? Let's go with Benjamin.
I'm going to say no. And the reason is that the United States has the strongest military in all the world. I believe as of last year, we spend $801 billion a year on our military. We do not need more spending. We spend more than I believe our top 10 allies combined. We are ridiculously powerful. Just send a couple of our boats over and we'll kick their butts. I don't need to spend more money. We have a lot of money to work with already.
Brody, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with Benny like every single time. I think we spend so much money on our military, and yet we still continue to justify spending more on it. I think it just takes money out of American people's pockets and pads those of like military people that sell like military equipment, things like that. I think the system that it's built itself on of like investing money into the military and then only like using 10% of what we actually create per year and then like throwing the rest away is like crazy to me. So I think including $50 billion on top of $800 billion that we already spend per year does nothing, especially in the area of national security, because we have like one of the strongest like security like bases like in the world kind of thing, especially in the United States. So no, I think this bill is so unnecessary and like, yeah, kind of slimy. So definitely not.
Okay. Interesting points and great perspectives, but we have some bad news for you to consider, and we're going to put this to our panelists soon too. A social media campaign has gone viral with videos showing the devastation in the allied country. Do you change your decision? Before we think about this, I want to add our nation's leaders are going through a very similar situation right now. Many of them are up for re-election, and many of them are considering what the clamor is coming from their districts. I don't want to add too much extra color that isn't on the card, but I just want to make sure, when you're thinking of leadership decisions, what would you be doing here? Gerardo, let's have you weigh in.
Well, I think that you definitely can't give from an empty cup. So if our country has record high inflation and gas prices, then there's obviously something going on here in the homeland that we should focus on first before trying to send resources out to other countries.
Okay. Anna, let's go with you. What are your thoughts?
I mean, from an economic perspective, if you do increase taxes, it can help reduce inflation. But I do agree with their points that we do spend a lot on military endeavors. However, I believe it would depend more on how much of a threat it is to the United States. If it poses a great threat to the United States, then I would consider maybe allocating additional funding. But if it's not a huge threat to us, I would not support the bill.
Okay. I didn't really hear too much that differed from your opinions, but did anything of what the panel say change or add extra color to your decision, Benjamin?
When you talked about the propaganda that's going around and showing the atrocities going on in the place, I think that a potential response to that could be showing what's actually going on and potentially giving counter-propaganda to show that we actually have a decent military. We can take care of the issue. We don't need to spend more money. Like Gerardo added, we have a lot of economic problems. We don't need to add icing onto the cake that is the American economy right now. It's not in a good place.
Okay, so you're suggesting get ahead of the messaging or counter it.
Yes.
Okay. Brody, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I still can't support $50 billion more to the military. I think that's like one of the worst things you could do as a lawmaker right now. I think it's like spitting in the face of any American who's struggling right now. And as high a poverty rate as we do have in a country that's so prosperous, yet we try and justify giving money to the military where we already spend more than so many countries combined. I think it's utterly ridiculous, and I think this bill is a sham. Okay.
Well, we've come to kind of a consensus here, but one more round. Is there anyone who disagrees? Sergey?
I say this as someone who is Ukrainian and has family in Ukraine, so this is obviously close to me. But I think we should support this bill 100%. Reason being is the United States is responsible for the existence of all those countries combined. France in its current state would not be around with the United States in its World War II influence. Germany in its current state after the reunification of Germany, West and East. Ukraine after the Soviet Union itself would not currently exist. Japan in its current state would not exist. South Korea in its current state would not exist. Taiwan in its current state would not exist. These are all countries that depend on the U.S. and their military power to be able to protect its sovereignty, protect its longevity and prosperity. If the U.S. even sets a precedent that one country that we've allied to defend against, or defend for, that sets a whole domino effect for individuals for countries that have been protected for so long by the United States. I mean, to imagine Germany ununified right now, to imagine the Soviet Union not even being dissolved so peacefully, to imagine South Korea that does not exist, a Japan that's still subservient to China as it was historically for 2,000 years, is an atrocious world history that I would not want to see.
I'm Ukrainian too. I understand the devastation, my entire dad's side of the family, so it's near and dear to my heart. But I think that, as you were saying, we waste so much of what we do spend on the military, and I think that $800 billion is more than enough. We already have the strongest military in the world, and I think that, we need to start understanding more about what our needs are in this country and actually start meeting those.
Also, this bill is national security. It's not even doesn't even deal with foreign affairs. We're just putting money back into our own pockets.
That's fair. Thank you guys for all of that discussion. That was really robust, and I felt like we got a lot of great points in there. This concludes this round, and for our next round, we're going to choose 2 new leaders. For this round, we're going to include our students from Cal State Fullerton, and they will be our next 2 decision makers. Gerardo, Selena, you guys ready?
Of course.
Great. Well, you are a member of Congress. You are co-authoring a bill that will provide aid to a group you campaign to support. Before the vote, a controversial picture of your co-author starts trending on social media. Do you proceed with the bill? Selena, what are your thoughts?
I want to first ask, can any information be provided about what the controversial photo was, or what the group that I'm supporting is about?
Good question. For the purposes of the exercise, I'm going to have you walk through what maybe some of those factors you might weigh in on. Be thoughtful that it could be any number of things. So go ahead and tell us what you're thinking through as you decipher.
Right. So for me, I'm just going to make this a little more realistic. And for me, some things that I care about are disability rights or suicide prevention. So for that, I would still support the bill, just because, in my perspective, the person who came out with the controversial photo, that's the other person. Maybe I could publicly address what that person did if it directly goes against what we're going for, if that makes sense. But unless it's super detrimental to the whole entire bill, and if it affects me, I will support the bill.
So essentially, yes, unless other factors are brought to light.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Gerardo, your thoughts?
Well, I think I would say no, because from a strategy perspective, if there is a controversial picture of one of my co-authors on the bill, that can definitely affect the support that I have for that bill. So I would have to say no on that one.
Okay. Well, the bad news is in, guys. So for Selena, since you said maybe yes, you're leaning that way, we're going to go with this. The picture shows your co-author in blackface at a college party. Do you change your decision? Think about it. Since you kind of went with no, Gerardo, here's your bad news. Polling shows your re-election depends on this bill passing. Do you change your decision? Not an easy spot.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. To talk to panelists, let's get Benjamin's reaction.
So I don't think we should care who writes the bill. Good legislation is good legislation. If it is from Democrat, from it is Republican or Libertarian, I don't care what party or what controversial figures are behind a bill. We should vote for good legislation. And so even if a fellow co-author of the bill did something as terrible as that, I would still support the bill, because I don't care who authored it, I care what the content is.
Okay, Sergey, what are your thoughts? How would you handle this?
Yeah, I mean, I would first take some time to publicly reprimand the co-author of this bill. That is absolutely unacceptable and should not be the face of what this country is. But as Ben stated, a good bill is a good bill.
Fair enough. Okay, leaders, given your bad news, given what the panelists have said and kind of reinforced maybe, what do you do then? Let's go with Gerardo, first response.
So I'm definitely hearing you out, Ben, about about how good legislation is good legislation. So, but at the same time, I feel like this is dealing with the American people, and I'm not sure that entirely all of them understand that perspective, even if I might. So I'll still have to not support the bill, even in spite of that information.
And one quick thing, your bad news said that your reelection is depending on the bill passing. How would you address that? What measures would you take maybe?
I would have to have more information because if I'm most likely representing more people than just myself. So I would have to really dig deeper into that and really see what bill it was and if it's worth potentially not being reelected.
Yeah,
so.
I need a little information there. I get it. Selena, what were your thoughts on everything?
Yeah, so I would say as long as the bill does not directly relate to anything that is related to racism, given that my bad news was blackface, I would first of all publicly reprimand that person and voice my opinion about how that one was just unacceptable. But I would still go along with the bill, even if that means I have to go alone.
Okay, since we have different decisions, we are going to put it to a vote. Panelists, who thinks that going through with this bill, in spite of the controversial picture, maybe blackface, was a good idea? Does anyone agree? Okay. Wow. In unanimity. Great. Okay. Well, sorry, Gerardo. Selena wins this round. Both very good thoughts. Those are both very good thoughts and a really robust discussion. Well, this concludes this round. Let's move on to the next. For this, I'm going to choose two new leaders. We're going to have Brody and Selena be our leaders this time. You guys ready?
Yes.
Okay. You are a governor. A bill has been introduced to implement critical race theory, or CRT, as a part of high school graduation requirements. In order to add CRT, either school days will need to be longer or a core class, either social studies, science, etc., will need to be eliminated. Do you support the bill? Let's go, Brody.
At face value, the way that this prompt is set up is to make it look like whoever's in support of this bill is going to be in support of cutting any kind of other access to education, whether it be math, science, or English, or social studies. So I would say that the bill itself, no. Do I support critical race theory being implemented in our education system? 100%. And I think people that oppose that aren't educated enough on what it actually is or what it actually teaches. But the bill right here, I think, is set up to it's set up against critical race theory as it is because it would involve removing any kind of core classes. And if you wanted to, put it under social studies.
And you agreed to bring up a point that it will put elected officials in a tough spot depending on how it is. The way it's written, this is very common to what our elected officials deal with.
It's actually not. There's no evidence actually anywhere. I looked it up when I was doing research for this, that any school district is trying to lengthen time of school days or take away any other core class to implement critical race theory.
For the purposes of this scenario, I'm going to continue with what it reads, even though
That's
it's
totally
different.
fine. I just wanted to
yes.
make that clear for everyone on the panel and to you.
Selena, what is your response?
Yeah, I would still support this bill. I definitely do think that CRT should be included in K-12 education because something as beautiful as the diversity of America, it's about time that people understand each other's backgrounds, histories, cultures, values, and why somebody may think some way or behave some way. And I think that critical race theory, it's very dependent on history, so I see no reason that critical race theory should not be implemented into a history or social science class.
So you support the bill?
Yes.
Yes? You said yes or no?
As it is, no.
Okay.
But it's really easy to add that into social studies. So I support CRT, not the way the bill is worded. I think it's really poorly worded.
I'm going to have you down as a no for the purposes
Sure.
of this.
Sure.
And here comes the bad news. For the bad news, no, you are receiving overwhelming pushback from teachers who are lobbying their state legislators as well as parents. Additionally, protesting in favor of implementing CRT starts occurring in major cities throughout the state. Would you change your decision? Hold that thought. It's very easy to answer right now. 1 second. Selena, it's in your bad news, since you are supporting the bill, is that local school boards throughout the state are receiving overwhelming pushback by parents. Your state's party leadership says that this bill, if passed, could jeopardize your re-elections as well as your party's legislative majority. Do you change your decision? I'm going to go to 2 other panelists before you guys decide. And let's have Benjamin weigh in. I was thinking on one.
So I don't think that we necessarily need to have an entirely separate course to incorporate CRT, and that being critical race theory. Yes, racism is a real thing in America, and it has created power structures which are very bad, and I'm not going to deny that. But I don't think we need to add an entire separate class. Something we could potentially do is just stop whitewashing our history and saying that racism isn't something that existed in America's past. Instead, teach history as it occurred in the way it is, and that would help people be more enlightened as to the power structures that currently exist in the system, rather than having an entirely separate course.
Paris, your thoughts as a panelist?
I have a lot of thoughts on this one. First of all, just want to say again that this, and just restate that this is not anything that really resembles any sort of policies that are going on in the United States, because I don't want any of our viewers to be confused about that, or our panelists, or our lovely moderator. But I think that in terms of the bill itself and CRT itself, it's important that for people to understand, especially those who came up with this question, who probably don't really understand what critical race theory is based upon the question, maybe not, that it's actually very patriotic. It's about learning about the civil rights, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act of 1964, 1965. It's about learning about the Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments. It's actually very patriotic, and it's about learning about, the importance of all of our histories, not just white history, and how the U.S. has harmed groups of people systemically in the past, and how that continues to influence our present day circumstances and power imbalances in this country. And for those reasons, I think that it's very patriotic, and we can, look to the past to see how we can build a better future that's equitable for everyone.
Okay. Leaders, back to you.
I think Anna had something to say.
We're going to come back. We're trying to zip through this. Leaders, back to you. Your decisions on this. Brody, what about you? What's your final thoughts?
Okay. After the bad news, I'm going back to the floor in terms of legislation. Listen, we have to continue to implement social studies, all these kinds of things. But I think what Selena says about it's part of history, right? I think it's weird that we associate critical race theory on its own, because it's very much it's just another part of our history that our government has decided to ignore because it doesn't make us look that great. But it's the reality of what happened. It's the reality of what happens as we're speaking right now. And putting it in its own category almost further upholds this idea that it's separate from our history when it's not, because it's the exact same as anything we talk about in social studies. It's the exact thing, So I can't support the bill unless we agree that we're not going to cut anything, because it's literally just a part of what we already talk about, history-wise.
Selena, your final thoughts.
Yeah, once I reread the prompt, I kind of changed my mind on this, and that I do not support the bill, and that I don't like how the days will be longer or core classes will be cut. But I do think that critical race theory is very, very important, and it should be just implemented as a part of another class, say history or social sciences.
Well, there you go. This is another discussion that could take years, and plenty of debates as they are going on right now. And so we're running out of time for these, but this concludes our round. Stay tuned for our next one. Before we conclude our time today, I want to end with one last question for our panelists. In your opinion, why is it important to include civil discourse as a part of the California dream? Anna, let's go with you first.
Well, to begin with, I think that we're living in very polarized times. If we just take one quick look at social media, we see 2 different extremes, And if you disagree with someone, you can just be canceled on the spot, doxxed. Like, there's a lot of just unnecessary violence when it comes to discussing your ideas, and there's not a lot of discourse. A lot of people are very closed off to even hearing the other perspective. And I think that coming together and just talking about our views and why is beneficial twofold. First of all, for ourselves, it challenges us and allows us to do more research or figure out why exactly we believe what we believe. And I think that's important as a human being, to know what you believe and not just hop into groupthink or anything like that. And for other people, it's beneficial because they learn to critically think. I think that we don't know how to think sometimes. And talking with other people and having these healthy discussions open up your mind to what's out there and show you maybe your opinion isn't factually correct, or maybe there's flaws in it. And discussing with other people allows you to see that and grow.
Benjamin, what do you think?
I think it's important because it helps us realize that we're not that far apart. A lot of us are on different sides of the aisle politically, and I know that as a fact. But when it comes to these things, I think social media has a tendency to make it portray the worst sides of every aisle. And when we come together and have real conversations with real people, it shows that we're all still Americans, and we love the country we live in, and we want what's best for it.
Brody.
I think it's important to remember that politicians really enjoy poking the bear in all of us. They really like dividing people, and I think we should always keep in mind that, like, politicians will never have your best interest in mind while they continue to pad their pockets and that kind of thing. So stuff like this, they're really afraid of, kind of thing. The fact we're able to sit here on different aisles of the political spectrum and have a conversation and not like want to kill each other, that's like their biggest fear. So I think we should continue to do this. I think it should be like a normal society, and by doing so, it helps like deconstruct a lot of the structures that we are like oppressed under as like non-politicians.
So I think civil discourse is probably one of the most important things that we can do, because without that, we won't be able to understand what other people are thinking. We won't know what they want to happen. We don't know their needs. We don't know how we can help them. So I think if we want our society to flourish, we need to have more circumstances where people can be brought together and discuss things that maybe they're not all on the same sides for, but that through the discussion they can bridge that gap closer together.
No matter what party we're in, no matter what side we lean towards, we're all human beings. We can all be good people. It doesn't mean just because you lean towards one side, you're a terrible person, you don't have values. No, civil discourse helps everybody open up their eyes about their own perspectives, what they might help them change their perspective. It might help other people also gain insight into what you think, what your personal history or experiences that led to your beliefs. And yeah, it just helps everybody better understand each other rather than poking the bear and rather than like making other people mad and stuff like that. Civil discourse is just a peaceful way of helping everybody understand each other better.
I couldn't agree more with what every single one of you guys have said, and I don't know if I have much new to add. The only thing I would say in addition is I think it's just important that we understand that, like, I can disagree with you about certain topics and still respect you completely with almost every topic, but if your opinion disrespects someone else's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's where I'll put my teeth out for that. And I think a lot of us would also agree with that, and that's what I think is so amazing about having debates like this, and I hope we do it more often, and they're happening not only in Orange County and in California, but all across our country and the world.
Yeah, everyone already kind of nailed it. I agree with everything that's been said. To just kind of mirror what everyone said, I think we all know how bad political polarization is. It's probably one of, if not the greatest issues facing this country right now. And I could go on an hour-long rant about the origins of polarization, but I guess, I mean, in order to alleviate that, like, the best place to start is to come to a basic understanding and just, I mean, talk to people. And I think that's what civil discourse does. And more civil discourse like this, hopefully, can maybe set us on a greater path in the future.
It's very true. Everything everyone said here was right on the mark. We face a lot of important issues today, but there's no way we can solve them if we don't come together and start talking about them with solutions. I want to say thank you to our panelists for joining us. And before we let you go entirely, can I get a show of hands? Who's on the right side of the political aisle? Would you be willing? Okay.
Wow.
And the left that you consider yourself? Very good. So this is completely possible all around our nation, and it needs to especially happen in California. We want to thank our panelists today for conducting an amazing conversation, robust with great points, and a lot of things to consider as we move forward. This concludes our program today. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to watch, and thank you especially to our sponsors, to UCI, UCI Health, and Polity for making this program available and free to all viewers. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon again at the OC Forum.